In this lesson, we take a look at routes and return types. The objectives for this lesson are to create your first minimal API calls, work with return types, learn to pass parameters to API calls, grouping APIs together, and generating documentation. Let's dive right in and start creating your first minimal APIs. So in the Program.cs template that Microsoft gave us, they gave us these samples here for weather forecasting. I'm going to go ahead and delete those, and I'm going to delete the additional data. We don't need any of that. This is really the starting point that you should have for any of your web API stuff. Now here's what we're going to do. We're going to add our own route now, and we do that by using the app variable. Remember, the app variable is created with the builder.build. And it's from here that we can set our endpoints using map get. Then the first parameter to this is your route. So I'm going to go ahead and create that route by using /API, which means I want an /API to be added to the URL whenever this is called. So that's the first parameter. The second parameter is the function that you wish to call. Now I'm going to use a very simple one here, and I'm going to simply just return. I don't even need the braces in this case. I'm just going to return a string like this. That is the simplest API endpoint that we can create. Let's go ahead and run this and take a look. Now, if you've ever done MVC, you know that there's a lot to do to get to this point. Whereas now I've got a very simple API call right here. If I click on the get, one thing that's really nice here is we can see down here, you can see the code is a success that it's expecting as a response. And look at the example value, it's a string. Well, that's exactly what we had. So if we try this out and we execute, we should now see that we get in the response body, hello everyone. Very simple. Let's create another one. app.mapget /API/hello world. This time we'll create another function here, and we're going to do a results.ok hello world. Results.ok just simply means that it's going to send out a 200 response, which is what we got from the other one. If you take a look here, let's run this one now. So now we have two API calls showing up here in our open API. And this one says that it's expecting a code of 200. And this one, it says it's expecting a code of 200. The results.ok is just a little more explicit that, yes, I am really wanting this to send back an HTTP status code of a 200. Again, if we try this out and we execute it, we get the exact same result. We get a string coming back. Now that's, again, pretty neat. Pretty neat that they can actually figure all this out and know what's coming back. But if you look, there is a little difference here. This one tells us that they're expecting a string. If you look at this one, there is nothing. They just say, well, all we know is that you're sending back a 200, but wrapped within that, there is going to be some other data. So there is a slight distinction here, and we're going to see a lot more of these as we move on. So we had this return type, which was a results.ok, but there's a lot of these return types that we can use. There's bad requests, there's created, there's no content, there's not found, there's the results.ok, there's results.problem. And all of these relate to those HTTP status codes that I told you were the most common ones. These are all the ones here in alphabetical order of the different methods that we can call to say, this is explicitly what I want to send back, this status code, and wrapped within it, there can be some data that you send as well. So on the results.ok, I was sending a string down, but like results.notfound or the results.nocontent, I may not send any data with that. For our next demo, let's just take a look at how we pass parameters to a minimal API route. Once again, we're going to start out with the map get. We'll put in our API hello person. And then for our function here, we're actually going to pass in a value. So here's a parameter coming in, right? The name parameter, for instance. And then we want to use this somehow. So I'm going to go ahead. I don't need this. If I'm just returning one thing, I don't need the enclosing braces there. And now you can see Visual Studio is really great. It gives me all this little hints, so that it did actually kind of fill all that in for me using a template literal there. And I'm just going to go hello, space, and then name. So this is really nice, this substitution. I love using this. This is a great addition to the C# language. All right, let's go ahead and try this out and see what happens. So when we run this, we're going to get now a third API in our open API here. And we say try it out, and look at that. It actually gives you an input because it detected that there was a parameter that you're wanting to pass in. So it says, well, give me that data so that I can make this call. And when you execute, what's really nice here is if you take a look at the request URL, you can see that it's telling you how you would actually make this call if you were submitting it through a JavaScript application or something. So it's telling you this is the request URL that you would call. It's then showing you what it got back here, a 200, and the body wrapped within that 200 status was hello, and then Paul, our replaceable parameter. Now you're not just constrained to sending back a string, we can actually return an object as well. Let's take a look at how we do this. So if we're going to return an object, we need a class. Let's right mouse click on the project and add a new folder. And we'll call it entity layer because we might have a lot of classes that we end up putting in here. So let's add then a class called product. So we're putting this product class into our entity layer folder. I'm going to replace all of this with a class that I've pre-created. And here you can see that I've got a product ID, a name, a product number, a color, a standard cost, a list price, etc. And these properties actually line up with corresponding columns in a table that we're going to use a little bit later in this course. So let's go ahead and save this, go back to our program, and then what we're going to do is let's add a using statement up here at the very top of our program called AdventureWorks API.entity layer. Because we're going to use that product class here, I need to do a using statement on it, of course. And then we can do app.map/get/API. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to actually do /product, but I'm going to add on another parameter, but I'm going to specify the parameter and the data type right within the route. Okay, so this is going to give our API, our Swagger API generator, it's going to give it a little more information about what we're looking for here. Then I create the definition of my function, and I'm going to say, hey, I really want to pass in this int ID. So obviously, the data type and that ID should match up with what you declare in that string. And now I'm going to return results.ok. I'm going to create a new product. And now what I can do inside of here, let's finish off these. But this is where I would then put all the properties and initialize it to some value. Typically, you'd get this from a database, which we're going to do later. But there we go. I've created a new product, initialize it to some data. Let's see what this looks like now when we run this and we get the Open API results. All right, there is our get/API/product ID. When we expand this, we can see, yep, it's expecting an ID. So when we do try it out and we put in an ID, doesn't matter what we put in here. And number one, when I execute this, now it's showing you again the request.url, but look at the response body. Okay, there we go. It's got all that data filled in. I mean, it's got the hard-coded ones that I put in, and then the rest of them are just defaulted to whatever the default value is for the data type in the product class, because I didn't initialize every single field. It takes that product class and it converts it to JSON for us automatically. Microsoft has built in the functionality to convert a C# object to a JSON object. Now notice that the first letter of all those property names is lowercase because that's a little more standard for Java and JavaScript objects. Whereas for C#, we really want it to be uppercase for our property names. But there you go, returning an object from a minimal web API. Well, now that we've seen how to return a single object, how about a list of objects? So in this case, let's return a list of products. Well, let's create another class to create a list of products. So right mouse click on the project and add a new folder again. And this time we'll call it repository layer. And inside of here, we're going to actually create a product repository.cs. Now I've created this already, this class, and it already has a whole list of products. As you can see here, there's a lot of them. So now that you have this repository class with this get method, let's go back to the program and let's create yet another endpoint. So we'll call it map.get, and we'll do /API/product. So this one's going to be real simple here. So in this case, what we're going to do now is return results.OK. So once again, we're doing that. And what we're going to do now is we're going to use that product repository class that I created, new product repository. Now it's not showing up because we didn't add a using statement, but if you hover over this in Visual Studio, you can have Visual Studio add that for you. So just like that, we now have created an endpoint that will return a list of products to us. Let's go ahead and run this. So Visual Studio saves all of that for you automatically. It runs it. It opens up Swagger. So now you can see we have yet another API that's been added. We click on this. We try it out. We execute. And you can see it's going to actually get quite a bit of data here. So it took a while to do. But look at all of this data now. So I've got a ton of product data in here. I think there's a couple hundred of these product objects that I've created. Now, I created these from the AdventureWorks Lite database, so it's actually going to match up to the data that we're going to use a little bit later. But there you go, returning a list of products. Let's change the previous hard-coded version that I did where I passed in the ID and just generated a hard-coded product object, and let's return that single product from the repository now. So we're going to go back here, and instead of having the hard-coded version of this, let's go ahead and do the new product repository .get, but we're going to pass in the ID now that got passed to the web API. If we take a look at the product repository, besides the get method, I actually have a get to which you pass an ID. It goes and gets the list of products and then does a where clause to figure out where that product is and gives me the first or default. And now it'll return a null object if it doesn't find the product ID that I've passed in. So let's run this. If I've done everything okay, we should come up, click on this, try it out. Let's try 760, which I happen to know is a good product ID. We're now returning the one that's not hard-coded. So we could try all sorts of different values here. It might be better if you're familiar with the data. One of the problems is, what if I put in something that was bogus? Okay, so now we're just going to get nothing here. Okay, so when I execute that with a bad value, we're getting nothing. It says 200, but that's really not correct, is it? Because we're getting a null value back. So let's go ahead and actually return the 404 not found when we put an invalid ID in for returning a single product. So you can see what the issue is on line 44, that I'm always wrapping the return value in the OK, even if that get passing in the ID is returning a null because it didn't find it. So it's still returning a results OK, and that's not what we really want. So we're going to change this code a little bit. And I'm going to create an instance of a product variable that could be null. And I'm then going to attempt to get entity equals, pull this out. So now it's attempting to get the ID and it'll put it into entity. All we need to do then is just do an if statement here that says if entity is equal to null, then let's return results.notFound. And here we could actually pass some sort of, string that says product with the product ID equal to ID was not found. So we can give the user data that, hey, we couldn't find this ID that you were requesting. So there's the string plus it gives us the 404. Otherwise, we go ahead and return a results.ok, passing back the entity that we did find. Let's go ahead and run this. And let's try out this new code where we now go ahead and let's do a 760. So we'll try the good path first. We can see we got the 200 and we got the product response. If I put in a bad value and I execute, now look what we're getting. We're getting the 404, so the error is not found. The response body is product with product ID equal to 9999 was not found. So much better approach to always be checking to see, are you really getting data? And we should be returning the same type of thing, a not found for a list of products. Now, right now, my repository is hard-coded, so I know I'm going to get data back, but later on, we're going to change that repository so it's getting data from a table. And what happens if the table is empty? We need to check for an empty list and return a 404. So let's kind of do the same thing here that we did in the previous example. So we're going to do a list of products, or let's call it list here. And then we're going to get all products. So list equals new. Actually, let's go ahead and just grab this code right here, like so. So now we just have to simulate that we didn't get any data back. And then we can do our test. If list is equal to null or list.count is equal to 0, then let's return a results not found. And we can say no products found or any error message that you want. Otherwise, we can put an else statement here, return the results OK, passing the list. So this line here just simulates not getting any data. So let's go ahead and try this out. We'll run this and we click on the API that'll give us our list. We execute and now you can see we get a 404, the error not found. If we were to comment that back out, now when we run this, we will get our list and we'll get the success code, HTTP status code of a 200 after it retrieves the complete list of data. Well, right now we have a little bit of a problem in that we're now getting kind of a big list of these APIs. And there's no distinction between the product APIs and the simple little samples we created at the very beginning. Well, what we can do is we can group APIs together by using the .withTags method that we attach on to the end of the map get. What it does is these tags all become a grouping mechanism, and it'll group all the like tags within Swagger. So let's take a look at grouping our APIs. Scroll back up in the program.cs and add at the very end of our simple ones with tags simple. Then down here on the other ones, let's add with tags product. So we'll take that one for that product API and we'll take it for this one as well. And now when we run this, we are going to see that the APIs are now grouped and we have a nice little header there, product and simple. Another problem that we have right now is the Open API, when you expand that out, just says that 200 is going to be returned because it doesn't know anything else. But we know that we've added some returns for a 404 as well. Well, what we can do is we can append a produces method that will specify what the status codes are returned and produces API documentation about the actual object or objects that will be returned. So let's take a look at using the produces method. Well, let's start out with the API that returns the list of products, and let's append on here produces. Now we know it'll produce a 200. We know it'll produce a 404. We also know that it's going to be producing a list of product objects that come back. So now we've told it all the possible things that it can produce. Let's copy this and let's paste it up here on the one that returns a single product. So instead of a list now, it'll just be returning a single product. So if we run this now, when we expand this out here and we look down here at the responses, notice the responses, we have a 200. You can now see a schema there. It's going to return a single product. And also look down here, there's a 404 not found. So it's now telling the Open API, hey, look, these are all the possible things that could be returned. If it returns with a 200, here's the actual schema that you're going to get back. Let's take a look at the Get API product. Okay, same type of thing, a 200, but notice now it's an array of the product objects. Also can return a 404 not found. So some great documentation that you can add with the Open API. In this lesson, we wrote several minimal APIs and we learned how to pass parameters to them. We returned lists and single objects, and we learned how to group similar APIs together and even documented the return types of those APIs, all using our nice Open API Swagger tool. Coming up next, using dependency injection.